You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are here in our final week discussing all the way to the end, all spoilers included, of Robert Thorogood's Death Comes to Marlow, out earlier this year. Chapter 41 is our final chapter, Herds, and I'm a little perplexed.
What do you mean?
I've got to confess.
But everything was wrapped up in such a tight, neat little bow by the end. All the characters had their resolutions. Suzie gets to go on TV. Mm-hmm. The mystery makes perfect sense. And there were no elements that were over or underplayed in the solving of said mystery. I
completely agree.
Okay.
It's the confusion more comes in that, you know, I've been studying law for the past 10 minutes.
Good. So you're an expert.
I cannot figure out what in a courtroom the purpose of a gavel is.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean, what is the purpose of a gavel? It is a symbol of power and authority.
Right.
It's made of bronze, apparently.
Which is conductive.
Yeah, it's conductive.
Like magnesium.
Yeah, just like magnesium.
Anyway, we'll come back to that in the mystery section. I wanted to talk a little bit about the wonderful journey that we went on to get to the end of this story. I guess the biggest hit, I want to start at the end, is the final scene that we get with D.I. Hoskins. Mm-hmm. Because the way that they unravel that man in this story is excellent. There is an argument that happens between Tanaka and Hoskins, which is a real argument that takes place where she is being chastised for going under his nose and following improper procedure and all of this stuff, only for it then to turn out that Tanika was right.
Yep, of course.
And she comes up to him and basically is like, oh, well, it's a good thing that we had that prearranged argument, sir, so that I could be in the right place to catch the killer. Of all of the threads in this book that we'll get into in a bit that kind of didn't quite come all the way back around, this one stuck the landing real hard for me.
I will say I agree with you that like the character arc of Tanika, like learning to be kind of like underhanded, like she adopts the old lady skills that she needs to survive in a man-run police department, which is great. Mm-hmm. And the way that they just absolutely throw that man in the bin, the Hoskins in the bin is fantastic. Although I will say I was a little disappointed that we didn't, because it's kind of hinted that he's come back to the force specifically for this case.
Yes.
But that is never brought up again, I don't think.
No.
Which is probably a thread for a later book.
Yes.
That's all like classic detective-y sort of stuff. And it's good that we can show that all the characters in the story, despite having their fallings out and their problems, they come together to do this complex plan, right?
Yeah, it really nicely wraps up the bonds between the women in this story. I think one of the reasons that I'm like unsurprised and still sort of satisfied, even though we didn't get the conclusion of why Hoskins came back to the force in as juicy of a way as we wanted, is that the story is very much women-led.
Yes,
like
for sure.
His decision to come back is very just spur of the moment, and he's sort of allowed to do that because he's a man in the story, and the women in the story basically stand up and do the same thing in return.
I do also like, as I kind of mentioned, that Suzie and Becks also kind of, they move their stories forward. They don't necessarily resolve all their problems, but like Becks goes to her husband and has a conversation about how much money she's making, and he's really supportive of her, which is good because then all of her like fears that she had, we can sweep that under the rug. We can stop seeing that financial advisor or whatever.
I feel like sweep under the rug is perhaps the exact opposite to what you mean there.
Well, look, I don't mean sweep under the rug. I mean deal with in a calm and adult manner and put them to bed. Maybe that's the term.
Yeah.
And then Suzie, she ends up going on TV.
Yes.
Which is fantastic because Judith has always been saying like, man, that's Suzie and her ego. If she gets any bigger, I'm gonna have to put her down a peg. And now Susie's gonna not just have her voice on the air, but her face on TV, and she's doing what she wants to do, which is great.
It is a bit of a curious wrap up though, because like there was all of this discussion about like going corporate or whatnot.
Yes. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because she has such a personal connection with her listeners, right?
It's true. And Robert Thorogood, being a television writer by trade before coming to novels, undoubtedly has a plot or two to throw around a television station that will be fodder for future books.
It is kind of interesting that Judith doesn't really further her plot line.
No, we kind of get a mention that she might go and investigate what happened to her husband further, which kind of feels like the opposite of progress in the way that, like, I've read it. I feel like...
Yeah, I mean, it feels like she's still stuck.
You know, she needs to separate herself from it, right? But she's kind of pushing closer. There are a couple of other plot threads that I felt would lean in to resolving other plot threads. Like, for example, the puzzle setter, the kind of connections with Lady Bailey as well.
Well, yeah, Lady Bailey functionally in the mystery is there to set up the glare of the magnesium tape, right? Like the witness who sees the murder happening and provides the clue that ties everything together.
Well, yeah, because like she is a character who is still kind of hanging on to the side of a past relationship, which is the same thing that Judith is seen to be doing. And we also have the flip side of that is the puzzle setter who is still in a relationship that we'll talk about in a little bit, but kind of finding new ways to enjoy life. And neither of those plot threads really link back directly to Judith, even though externally they seem to speak very much to her position.
I feel like we're supposed to see that she's thinking about these things even if she doesn't explicitly talk about them.
Yeah.
And that in a future book, I'm sure we'll like sit down with Becks and Suzie and they'll be like, well, Judith, you've helped us solve our problems and now it's our turn to help you.
And so a lot of these things are more left for us as the audience to observe and connect rather than the story making that connection. But I think I would have preferred if that connection had at least been drawn a bit more explicitly, because it means a couple of threads feel a bit loose, even though they are still implicitly connected.
I'll agree with that, because the whole like point of the cross-setting scene is it does talk about the idea of, you know, relationships, but it's really more about giving the trick away. It's more about the gavel. Well, like it's symbolic of the connection between the two characters.
Yes.
In the same way that Judith is the connection between Suzie and Becks, because she keeps dragging them into all these murder mysteries together. The husband of Peter is the connection between Jenny and Triss in terms of their like trying to get the money. And what was the other one I was going to say? Oh, the crosswords. The crosswords and those meetings are the connection between this husband and wife who can't get it on without some crosswords in their life for some reason. That's what they need.
I mean, it was a very weird scene showing up to the meeting between the crossword setter and his wife.
Yes.
I understand that the situation is sort of intentionally uncomfortable. Like it is a bit weird to just nose in on someone else's
spy
private meeting and be like, hi, tell me about your spycraft. Yeah. But it's just a little, I felt a little flustered reading it.
Well, it does tie into that theme that, granted, a lot of very intelligent murder mysteries tap into, which is if you find out the truth, do you really want to tell the truth? Like, are there times when the truth should be kept secret? And again, it is, as you say, it's kind of a shame that this puzzle doesn't tie into the core mystery more, but like, this is a truth that these two characters have with each other. They share this private thing. And it is noteworthy that Judith decides to like walk, like she doesn't just observe and try and figure it out, right? There is a point where her detectiving stops and her nosiness kind of gets the better of her and she has to insert herself into the story, which I think is a really interesting kind of character moment.
Well, yeah, and it also sort of ties back to her endless curiosity with her own personal story and why she can't like separate herself from her past.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it does, as I was saying, still link in together, but it definitely would have been nice to have, I don't know, maybe a scene between Suzie and Becks where, as you say, they do kind of like talk about
the whole thing. And I think that that's the thing that we're highlighting here is that Judith's is a little more stagnant, a little more descriptive, whereas Suzie and Becks are both chugging along just fine. They are moving along. They are getting new opportunities, discovering cryptocurrency, and living their best lives.
Yeah,
right?
and that also does come back to like just the way that language is used in this book compared to a lot of other classic detectives. We were talking about the Miss Marple thing with the like way that there are other cues in a scene to tell when Miss Marple has noticed something, whereas Judith just tells us she's noticed.
Yeah, she just tells us what's going on. And then she sits down for, I think, 10 pages to explain the crime to the person who did the crime.
Yes.
Which is a bold move. Maybe we'll get into that.
I mean, it has to be done because it's a murder mystery novel, but I do see your point.
Does it need to be done in this exact way, in this part of the country, localized entirely within the study? Does it?
I think we can interrogate that in the mystery section, Herds, which is coming up at the end of today's show.
Let's do it. Honestly, I'm excited.
Stick around. You're listening to Death of the Reader here on 2SER 107.3. This is your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are discussing Robert Thorogood's Death Comes to Marlow all the way to the end. Spoilers are in the house. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex here. We are joined once again by 2SER's Irene Diakonastis. This time, she's in conversation with crime writer Ray Cairns, talking about her latest novel, Dying to Know, which follows up her Ned Kelly shortlisted and Davitt longlisted The Good Mother. Follows the story of a couple of siblings, one who disappeared in terrifying circumstances and the other who keeps the search for her alive. I'll throw you over to Irene for this conversation now. You're on Death of the Reader. Stick around.
Ray, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on.
For crime lovers looking for a new original thriller, how would you describe Dying to Know?
Okay, Dying to Know, it's a standalone and it's set in Sydney. It opens with budding journalist Geneva Layton receiving a phone call that changes the entire course of her life. Her terrified sister is on the line, trapped in the boot of a moving car. She has no idea who her abductor is and she's begging Geneva for help. And then the line drops out. Police search for Amber. Geneva's days are filled with caring for her very young niece and nephew. And the days turn into months, which turn into years. When shocking new evidence finally emerges, Jen becomes desperate for answers. But to find them, she's got to take on the political power of her brother-in-law's family, the muscle of a formidable motorcycle gang, and the questionable support of a policeman who betrayed her in the very first month of the investigation. The closer Geneva gets to the truth, the more danger she's in.
What was your motivational inspiration to write this particular story?
I listened to a young woman talk about the impact of her brother going missing on both her and her family, and how I was struck by how it completely upended every aspect of her life. And I got to thinking, in missing person stories, we often focus on the procedure, the search, or the person that's gone missing. And I wanted to look at the impact on the people left behind, essentially. And then I was driving to an event, and I'm a bit of a what-if person. I'm always asking myself what ifs. And in front of me there was a Camry. It has the old-style boot. And all of a sudden I was like, what if someone's in that boot? What if they're trying to get out? How would they have got in there? How would they get it? How would they let anyone know they were there? And then I was thinking, well, what if I was in that boot? And that kind of led me to my opening scene. But then I always kind of want to have a depth and colour in the novel. So I also start with a moral question. So my first novel, The Good Mother, the question was how far would a mother go to protect her child? And in this one, it was, is uncovering the truth always worth the price you and your loved ones might pay?
And touching on a previous point you made about the impact on people left behind, I guess this kind of leads us to talk about the main character, Geneva, who is really put in this interesting position when her sister is kidnapped because she has to cope with this sudden loss. How do you think when the main event happens to Geneva, she dealt with this sudden grief or loss? Were there any coping mechanisms she may have used? And do you think these have changed as new information about her sisters comes to light later in the novel?
Yeah, look, I think that what happened when her sister went missing was she was absolutely filled with guilt and shame because her sister Amber had asked Geneva to go for her, and Geneva had said no because she was too busy. So she has this belief that she's intrinsically selfish and that that's the reason her sister went missing. If her sister hadn't been there, she wouldn't have been taken. Geneva doesn't believe she would have been taken because she's taller and bigger and not as petite as her sister. So she focused every bit of energy onto looking after her very young niece and nephew, and swallowed a lot of who she was. She gave up her journalism cadetship. She just became an at-home mum in a suburb in Balmoral where she doesn't fit in at all. And then when the news comes to light about her, various without spoilers, more information, I think that reinvigorates who she is and empowers her to start investigating as an everyday person, because she doesn't, she's not a police officer and doesn't have those contacts, but gives her the opportunity to grow into herself again. I don't know, that's a real way to put it, but she becomes who she really is at heart.
I think that Geneva's really epitomizes a strong female lead in novels, especially in the crime genre. And with that, leading from what you were talking about, do you think she has certain expectations or harsher expectations on how she deals with her sister, how she treats her newfound situation?
Yeah, I mean, she takes on the care of these children at a point in her life where she's incredibly ambitious in her career, and she isn't even sure she wants family. She's grown up, with parents that they didn't have a great relationship, and I think that she's trying to figure all that out, but she doesn't. The biggest thing is she feels is shame about how she treated her sister. Her sister essentially mothered her, and then she let her down. That's her viewpoint. I think she's very tough on herself throughout the novel. And I think I see a lot of women around me being very tough on themselves. And I think it's in the media as well. I think, that it was interesting to explore that in the character.
It's very important to bring that to light. Definitely when you're reading about that experience, not only may a lot of women relate to it, but it can be quite confronting as well.
Yes.
This next question is from Felix Shannon, who is a host of Death on the Reader on 2SER. Yes. And he says that one of Australia's most acclaimed crime novels about siblings at the wrong end of the law is The Rules of Backyard Cricket by Jock Sarong, wherein the protagonist spends most of the book recounting his life with his brother from the boot of a car. More recently, we've also had novels like Jack Heath's Kill Your Brother. So that kind of leads him to question, what is it about siblings that has us picturing them trapped in claustrophobic spaces?
Maybe sometimes we just want to be able to put them there. I don't know. The sibling relationship is such an interesting one because nobody else comes from that perspective in the world. Even being different, first child or second child does change your view on the world and your experience in a home is very different. But you still have points of reference that are the same, time periods that are the same. So I think that idea of that sibling relationship, there's so many complexities within that. And, whether the other person's a carer, whether you fight all the time, whether you're not close. And there's so much you can explore as a writer with that. So I think that's why writers go there and it's also a different kind of love than, say, romantic love or love for a child or love for parents.
Well, Ray, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a great chat. I've really loved it.
Ray Cairns there, talking with our own Irene Diakonastasis about Dying to Know, Ray's latest thriller, which is out with HarperCollins, and thank you to them for providing copies to 2SER. We're going to jump back in to Robert Thorogood's Death Comes to Marlow. Stick around. You're on your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader, Flex and Hertz, here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. We are at the end, the closing scenes, the closing chapters, the explanations of Robert Thorogood's Death Comes to Marlow. Spoilers are in. Herds, we were talking about the end of the start of the show, just to make it confusing as sentences as possible.
Good. I appreciate that.
That the denouement must be done.
Yeah,
you were protesting.
Well, this is the thing, right? I famously complain when a murderer, not the victim can't talk. When the murderer isn't given a chance to fight back or explain themselves or get one last shot in before they get tackled to the ground by the police, that sort of thing. I feel like spending that much time with Judith just explaining what happened in the book when it's already like relatively obvious it feels like a bit of a time waste to me. I really enjoyed catching the criminal.
Yes.
I mean, I'm looking at the text now at this pretty much exactly when Tanika walks out with the audio recording. That's like the end of the scene. It's like, we've caught you. And then we don't see Jenny again. Jenny doesn't have a chance to like deal with the situation. It's like, her world crumbled around her. I feel like it was lacking some sort of spice in the way that Jenny was interacting with that scene, something to kind of keep me invested. Because as much as I enjoy Judith explaining at great lengths how the bronze gavel was the linchpin of the entire mystery.
Hold your horses there. We'll get to that.
I can't help it. I don't know. This is something I'm still kind of passing my brain, but like...
No, I completely agree. I mean, one of the things that we've enjoyed most over the past couple of years on the show is books that are able to get something really interesting out of their denouement.
Yeah.
In a book that, much like the Thursday Murder Club, is sort of about not underestimating anyone in society, I feel like sitting in a room as your denouement is underselling what these people can do. It sort of undermines that message a bit. Not explicitly, but very subtly. There are so many options for things you can do and so many holes that you can poke in the basic structure of a murder mystery to make a breakdown exciting.
There needs to be chaos of some level, some controlled chaos. Because if the detective just tells them what's going on...
It doesn't need to be a chase scene,
yeah.
But that's not the only option to kind of create a bit of, as you say, Herds, controlled chaos in this book.
She just gives up. They're like, well... Triss is going to confess, and that's what's going to happen. And she's like, oh, I guess I'll give up now.
I guess at this point, Herds, before we get into the gavel.
The gavel.
What's happening in the point situation?
Oh, yeah.
Because I have a points thing that we need to address as well.
So I'm gonna start out by saying I think you did really well last week.
Thank you.
I was hovering around 2 points because you pulled the old switcheroo on your solution when you realized that you had missed something, because the detail that I was looking for was that he'd been killed beforehand. That is the big trick.
Yes.
And it's why in the first episode I mentioned, well, Triss could have killed him later. That's what that like bad joke theory is foreshadowing.
Yes.
Which is pretty clever, actually. And you managed to figure that out basically as we were chatting about it, which I really loved. And I was like, well...
Yeah, those are my favorite solves.
Yeah, and I was like, man, I really can't see myself not giving you 3 points. And then you said...
I rained on my own parade, did I?
You said, and then I guess Triss was the one who cracked the safe and got the will out. And I went, I thought it was really obvious that it was Jenny. That was my first thought when she gave Judith or whatever the code.
She told them
She told her the code in like a hesitant sort of way. Because what's really going on is that she realizes that Triss is going to give up the game, which is what happens in the end anyway, but whatever. She leads them to the will because she thinks, if Triss tries to give me up and I can say that I'm the one who showed them the will, then that'll look good for me.
2 points by the sounds of things.
It's 2 points, yes, at the end.
I also have a small thing. You'll remember I gave you 1 point for 8 detectives.
Yeah? I'm pretty sure I clawed 2 points back out of that.
Well, I was contacted by a listener after that episode went to air. They made the observation that by the rule that I laid out, that you had to predict something that had not yet been revealed as an inconsistency in the story, you did, in fact, win yourself an extra point.
Are you telling me I'm about to get 3 points?
I'll have to... I must confess, I didn't bring my logbook of points with me today. But you will at the very least be getting an extra point.
I might get 3 points for that book, which I feel bad about, but also I will take.
Listen, the audience has come through for you here.
Look, shout out to the audience. You're listening out there. You're what makes this show worth clawing points away from.
The audience member in question did ask not to be named lest the Flex fanatics come for them, but
okay.
I can be fair. Okay. I can be a fair member of this organization.
Of this court, this murder mystery court. Look, If you're
All right,
begrudgingly, arm-twistingly going to hammer that point, I'll take it.
Let's get to the last thing before we wrap up today. Herds the gavel. Oh
Yes,
my gosh.
please, tell me about the gavel. I want you to just enjoy how important it is.
I've read this entire paragraph, 3 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs about the gavel so many times over that I stopped bothering to count. I still do not understand what the purpose of the gavel
is. So here's
is.
the thing.
You mentioned earlier in the first part that narratively it symbolizes a link between two characters.
Yes, it does.
Mechanically speaking, they needed like the weight of it to lower it down the fireplace, right?
I don't know. Is that even mentioned? I don't even remember.
That was my best guess.
It's not what it is,
but it
though.
doesn't make sense.
No, it's not what that's not what it's for. It's just so that when they have the 2 pieces of magnesium tape, they can tie it together with something. That's all it is. The idea is it's just the division of labor.
But just tie the tape to the tape.
No, it's too difficult, apparently. They have to hook it to the gavel.
All he had to do was wrap the end of the tape in the study to the end of the tape attached to the gavel. So just wrap the tape around the tape. That's what the book says, verbatim.
I don't know. It says that they have to wrap it around the gavel, which is just how it is, I guess. The gavel is important. It's a symbol of authority. It's symbolism. You just don't get it. Clearly,
I don't get it.
Clearly, you've
I
never
really
tried to tie 2 ends of magnesium tape to each other. I would imagine.
That is interestingly untrue. I've just never used it to murder someone.
Okay. How long does it take you to tie 2 pieces of magnesium tape together?
It'd probably take me more time to start and read the stopwatch than it would do to take the task.
But would it take longer to tie the 2 ends of the magnesium tape than it would to tie 2 ends of magnesium tape to a gavel?
You know, I don't have the evidence on that one, Herds. I must confess, the jury's out on that decision.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I'm basically playing devil's advocate here because I also think this is a bit silly. Like, I get it symbolically. I understand why there is a thing in between the 2 pieces of tape.
Yeah.
I don't know why it had to be a gavel. I don't know why the gavel remains in the fireplace for so long. Judith says, like, I wouldn't have suspected you, or I wouldn't have been able to prove it was you if not for the gavel.
The big thing is my solution initially last week before I corrected myself, which was great fun. Don't get me wrong. I did enjoy myself. The things that I said weren't really mechanically proven to be impossible, but the story kind of with the gavel as a prime example doesn't close enough doors on what is and isn't possible to like make it really challenging.
The locked room is not that complicated. It is just that it was locked and then they put the keys inside the man when they open the door, and that's fine. That's like a fine locked room, but
everything from there is extra detail.
Yeah, nothing else really matters. Also, it's not even a locked room because it's got the fireplace. Like, they don't really establish that the fireplace was closed. You could even say that someone snuck down the fireplace.
Are you suggesting that Santa Claus did this murder, Herds?
I'd put it on Santa Claus if I had to pick somebody. If you really wanted to just go for it, like, yeah, Tris is like a thin guy. He could sneak up and down that fireplace. Like,
yeah, that man is about as thick as a piece of magnesium tape.
That sounds right
as
to me.
Evidenced by his confession.
That sounds about right. That was a very clever flex. Thank you. Also, Robert, I am speaking to you directly now. Put an actual crossword in these books. I'll be honest, I haven't read the first one, but based on this book, there is no actual crossword in this book. Put a crossword in the book. I would love to solve a crossword.
Nonetheless, Herds, I think it's time to wrap up Death Comes to Marlow.
Okay, good.
As I walk away wounded.
With a gavel in your eye.
Yes. And I want to go to a bit of a weird choice.
Uh-oh. What does that mean?
We are going to a book that is not explicitly a mystery novel, but is explicitly an inspiration for several of the texts that we've covered this year.
Ooh.
I found it via Alex Pavesi's blog on his website. Well, I'd heard of it before, but I found this connection.
Look, I'm sure that you'd heard about it through many voices and mouths.
I am an expert on crime fiction, Herds. Have you not heard me on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation?
Look,
don't you know I'm credible?
I was also on there. I got them to say that I was on an award-winning podcast, which is a stretch at best, but it was great. It's a good time.
Anyway, we are going over to Death and the Seaside by Alison Moore. This book is broken up into 3 parts, so would you believe our 3 episodes will be parts 1, part 2, and part 3.
That's crazy. Whoa, don't spoil that for the kind people out there. And for me.
This is an interesting book about a relationship between a few women and the blurring lines between fiction and reality. So you can kind of see where our little metafiction-y stretch is going.
Calling it now, they're all dead. Seaside killed him. The end.
No comment.
Seaside killed him.
We will see you
Let's go.
for Death in the Seaside next week on the show. This is your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3. I'm Flex, he's Herds. We'll catch you then.